But as figure 4 suggests, reliance on these two systems, simulation and computation, is indeed a scalar rather than binarized phenomenon. On the one hand, the higher frequency of meta-narrative didactics and off-site stories reveals that even when simulation predominates, the computational function of narrative is still present, meta-narrative points being at least partly anchored in the here and now of interactional space. On the other hand, as figure 3 shows, iconics do not entirely disappear in on-location versus off-site tellings, but merely become a less frequently used resource for spatialization. The data thus suggests that reliance on simulation and computation is not a toggle switch affair, but rather a blending of cognitive and communicative strategies that assumes different proportions depending on the narrative context at hand. On to the conclusions. Hence, the claim that narrative provides a crucial mediating link between spaces and places is valid, but valid in different ways for different storytelling contexts. Further research along these lines may confirm the existence of an overarching preference for narrative placemaking, a preference apparently governing spatialization in the corpus under study. Note that in the shift from off-site to on-location tellings, narrators could, in principle, have continued to rely mainly on simulation of place. However, when objects and locations in the here and now presented themselves as possible anchors for spatial reference, storytellers showed a preference to use them to help their interlocutors compute and not just simulate places in story worlds. The overall preference for narrative placemaking thus seems to be, whenever possible, recruit elements from the current environment and use them to help interlocutors compute places, thus reducing the amount of narrative simulation that needs to be done, and in effect, distributing the cognitive burden of placemaking across as many components of the material setting as possible. Whether the same preference organizes the narrative construction of place in other communicative media and other storytelling contexts remains a topic of future research. Thanks.
Questions or comments?
I have a question. I enjoyed that very much. I was wondering if you could interpret something that I do. I've noticed that I do, and it's obviously dysfunctional because people get distracted. Because I will be talking about something in a different context, and then I will gesture in the direction of the thing in that context that I'm talking about. And then the person will look toward my gesture, and then I'll realize that I've just distracted them. So what am I doing in terms of your framework?
If you were telling a narrative at that moment, it would, I guess you could say that you had migrated to narrated gesture space without cueing your interlocutors to migrate with you, or they just weren't perceptive enough to pick up on what you were doing. It didn't go along, depending on how you want to play it.
Other questions? I don't know, I'm interested in getting back in touch with you on this because Boyd Davis and I are working on a project on the discourse of Alzheimer's patients, and in the spaces and places in relation to that. I'd be interested if you had any ideas on that, because that seems to be one of the problems, is that we're not in the same place.
Yeah, and actually it might be that the cognitive impairments that go along with that would impede the ability to make transpositions and laminations of the sort that would be expected under normal narrative protocols. I mean, you couldn't cue those, or you might be already making it inside of a shift without having signaled it, or vice versa.
Right, and it might help our understanding of those narratives to kind of put an awareness level of that on it.
Yes.
The clip that you showed us was interesting because apparently he was talking outdoors and evidently in the same area where this incident had happened. So his gestures were essentially related directly to the experience itself.
That's right.
You wonder, suppose he had told the same story somewhere else, inside.
That's right.
How would his gestures have related to it then? I mean, here they were so directly related, it was quite clear.
Yeah.
But it'd be interesting to see him telling it somewhere else.
That's a great comment. The question would be, do the functions of the gestures get picked up by other systems like the iconic gesture system and so forth? Another issue there is that actually I looked at two on-location stories, Bicycle Wreck, and then another story called Chet and Tom, with which students in NC State are probably already sickeningly, they're sickened already. You might having shown it in about 20 classes. But anyway, in that story, the narrator he's actually at a greater distance from the camera, and he can indicate a larger swath of the environment of his gestures, and uses even more extended diagrams there than JGH can in this story about the bicycle wreck, because he's closer up to the camera, and he has to kind of, the other story uses more grounded diagrams. He has to use more extended diagrams because you can't quite see everything from that camera angle that you could in the other story, Chet and Tom. So the amount of the environment visible to the camera affects what kinds of gestures are used, as well as the other situations you're mentioning.
Thank you very much. We'll go on to our next presentation.